No, this isn't clickbait. Sorry if the title is too vague. Godzilla is more popular than Kong in nearly every way. End of. No questions asked. If you're looking for a video proclaiming that Kong has a greater fanbase, just keep on looking. What I'm instead referring to is a general audience who are watching these movies. First time viewers especially. Most of this audience prefers Kong to Godzilla, and they make up a majority of the ticket buyers. So today, we're going to be breaking down the psychological tendencies that help people draw closer to Kong, the limitations set on the filmmakers regarding Godzilla's personality, and then what Godzilla x Kong Supernova could do to make Godzilla more understandable. Enjoy! So at first glance, it's fairly obvious why Kong is more popular with general audiences. He's the main character of both films, let alone Godzilla being the pseudo-antagonist of GVK. He's also the protector of humanity instead of the natural order, and so he has a greater connection with the cast and by extension, the story. But there's a bit more to that, the real kicker being Kong's face. It's far more human than Godzilla's face, and that also means that it's far more expressive. We can tell when he's angry, sad, happy, basking in irony, caffeinated, cold, floating, speaking sign language, throwing children, dead. All of the emotions we use in regular conversation day to day. This in turn means that it's easier to anthropomorphize Kong on a psychological level. Quick rundown on that word as I'm going to be throwing it around a bit, but basically, it's the human nature of applying emotions and personalities to something that isn't human. Either a pet, a car, a fictional dinosaur, Mark Zuckerberg, a box, anything. It's basically the Pixar mentality, as movies like WALL-E and Cars wouldn't work without it. It helps our brain make the jump from car with mouth and eyes and yet doors for some reason. I didn't even want to open that can of worms, literally. It helps make the jump from that to a sentient character with a personality. Anyway, a study published in 2010 by the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology focused on anthropomorphic tendencies and affectance motivation, and it supports why people like Big Monkey. Quote, "We propose that people anthropomorphize, in part, to satisfy affectance motivation, the basic and chronic motivation to attain mastery of one's environment." The article then goes on to describe 5 studies they conducted demonstrating that, quote, "increasing affectance motivation by manipulating the perceived unpredictability of a non-human agent or by increasing the incentives for mastery increases anthropomorphism." To paraphrase, this report believes that we apply human emotions to certain things to explain their actions and motivations, all with the purpose of understanding them and pleasing the puzzle-solving part of our brain. The studies then show that changing how random the certain things' actions are increases anthropomorphism, as we try to find the motive behind it. The final results also determine that anthropomorphizing a stimulus makes it more predictable and understandable, and that anthropomorphism satisfies the motivation to make sense of uncertain situations. Yes, I do have multiple past year assignments, but I don't see how that relates to your question about my priorities. These will show that we're not just giving things emotions and personalities for the sake of it, we want motivations. Nothing's worse than when a character makes a dumb decision that you can tell is only so the plot can progress. And if you want explanations, look no further than Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. I've heard so much praise for GXK's big monster action and focus on the kaiju, but I seldom hear anything about its visual storytelling. The wordless conversations, the little cues present in every ape, the abundance of crystals everywhere that has definitely aged rather well. And the details like the crystal that controls Shimu appearing to be one of her crystal spike, dorsal plate, spine, things, which we can tell not only by an actual comparison, but also by how they glow when Scar King uses the crystal. I could say the word crystal even more times, but you get the gist of it. Here's a neat challenge thing: take a look at the visual cues, facial expressions, and body language in the next clips, and try to see how the filmmakers got the intended emotion and thus motivation across. Those will make a stark contrast to the majority of Godzilla clips. Just look at this. Is he happy? Is he angry? Is he trying to convince Shimu? Is he threatening Shimu? Why is he screaming? Is he stupid? And now besides that one moment which I cherry picked, there are some standout examples of Godzilla showing his motives and emotions. For instance, just before Kong leaps onto his back for a launch pad, he gestures to him, And when Mothra returns, we can tell he recognizes her and understands that he needs to stop beating up the big monkey. Don't worry, Kong was winning. Truth. Besides that, the main key difference is that we can tell why Kong does what he does, when he does it. Whereas Godzilla, not so much. Here's an interview from the director of both Godzilla Kong movies, Adam Wingard, about the limitations Toho, the original creators and owners of Godzilla, put on the character.
Like one of them, for instance, is they don't want Godzilla to emote, you know, like in terms of like they see him as like this godlike force of nature, and so to them it's out of character if you have him reacting in a normal way to things, right? But there was always ways around it. We definitely have some moments where I think Godzilla is more emotive in this film than he has been in any of the MonsterVerse movies, and we just had to get clever with it. And I think that sometimes that stuff is kind of presented to you in a very like like brick wall kind of way, but if you just do certain things and present it to them just right, and if they're on board with the movie, they seem to give us plenty of leadway.
So as the interview makes abundantly clear, Toho don't want their golden goose to be too down to earth. Sort of like how the Nintendo employees didn't like the way that Bowser held his teacup in Wreck-It Ralph. They need to maintain his image. And the Monsterverse, particularly King of the Monsters, takes the stipulation of Godzilla being an indiscriminate force of nature in its stride, with most of the villains trying to upset the natural order of things. But this makes him more like an animal, relying on instincts, rather than relying on emotions. Honestly, I'm impressed that the filmmakers were able to get Godzilla to be even half as likeable as he is. No wonder Kong was the main character of both films. It's a no-brainer with a contract like that. However, this creates a problem of Godzilla's motives only being explained properly by other characters, more often than not after the fact. This means that the original perception of his motive sticks, regardless of how accurate it is. For both films, we don't know why he's doing his side quests until over halfway through the movie, and to be honest, the dialogue in these movies are easily the most forgettable parts. Look, general audiences aren't as dumb as most people make them out to be. For the vast majority of all movies we see, we fall into that category. The concept of a natural protector of Earth who is above good or evil and really dislikes monkeys is understandable enough. When you have one character clearly expressing their emotions and the other doing whatever regardless, you're gonna assume it's intentional. Now, pretty much everything Godzilla does is explained in these stories. None of this is at fault with the films or the people behind them whatsoever, or even the general audience. If anything, it's the contract that Toho put on Godzilla. But considering how the last reinterpretation went, I'm not surprised it's so restricted. Godzilla heavily relies on body language, visual cues, and most importantly, context. I believe that last point, context, is the answer as to why general audiences don't really gravitate towards the big G. For example, at the start of GXK, the very first thing he does is destroy Scylla, which seems extremely out of character for someone who's meant to keep the natural order. But turns out, Scylla had been destroying power plants and stuff, and Godzilla had been trying to stop her since about a week before the movie takes place. You know where that's explained? The prequel comic. There's also a lot more of that precious context in the novelization, because it's based on the screenplay and outright tells us what the monsters are feeling. When the rock struck the other ape in the skull, Kong felt an immense sense of gratification. There's some really good parts where Kong and Zuko share their names, and Zuko starts learning how to sign. Overall, it just adds a lot to the movie. For example, the reason why Godzilla returned to the Colosseum is because the Roman architecture reminded him of his old haunt, and a painting of Godzilla fighting Shimu betrays him as worried, though it's reasoned that the artist was projecting their fear onto Godzilla. All this is to say that, the more outside media you consume, the better understanding of these movies you'll have. And you don't have to get everything about the movie to know this stuff, because people online are constantly sharing new information released. On top of that, the vast majority of returning fans are not watching these movies for Kong. Just look at the many predictions for Supernova. He isn't even mentioned in most of them. The fans, including me, don't want Supernova to be a Godzilla Kong movie. They want it to be a Godzilla movie. In fact, ask some of my friends who had watched these movies which emotions both kaiju are conveying in this scene. Their answer? Whenever Godzilla was on screen, most weren't paying any attention to Kong. This isn't to say that Kong has no fans, that's literally the antithesis to this video, and most MonsterVerse fans enjoy both kaiju. But Kong is easy to read, easy to relate to, and easy to sympathize with. In contrast, Godzilla basically requires you to understand his character beforehand, and can't rely on his actions alone. and that's why general audiences prefer Kong over Godzilla. Oh my god, that's the name of the video. With all that solved, why am I talking about all this? It's been said numerous times by different people, but the appeal of the Godzilla x Kong movies is gonna wear off fast, and to have sustainability, solo movies need to be viable. We need casual fans to enjoy Godzilla more, because all Warner Brothers learned from releasing King of the Monsters at the wrong time was that solo Godzilla movies, with even Toho's biggest characters, aren't a surefire success. And with Kong finally finding his family, his main arc has been completed. Now, I am not a filmmaker or incompetent executive. I have no idea as to what the future of the Monsterverse holds. But I make YouTube videos as a hobby, so I'm going to pretentiously assume that my recycled ideas are better than anyone else's. Firstly, we need more monsters besides Godzilla and Kong, as much as I hate to admit it, but calling the Monsterverse a cinematic universe is only slightly above insisting that the Sonic cinematic universe is a real thing. That's a franchise. Though out of all of these franchises, cinematic universes, the Monsterverse has the best name by far. It's okay guys, I'm unbiased. So where do I think that they're going? Pacific Rim. It's obvious. Project Powerhouse's blueprint is literally Gypsy Danger's arm. No, that is not the Beast Glove. Also Knifehead makes a cameo, and they own the license. It's a no-brainer. Other than that, Ultraman or Gamera could be cool, would be a pain to get the license, but I could see them packaging it behind expanding the brand to the West, after how successful that was for Toho. For Supernova, first and foremost, it's more Godzilla focused, and they are also making the human characters the best written ones yet. Just ignore the way they said both of those things about the new Empire. Jokes aside, and while test screenings don't indicate that the tone is going to be more mature, it does seem that there's going to be more Godzilla in it, due to the main villain, unnecessary spoiler alert, being Space Godzilla. On top of that, Baby Godzilla has been heavily rumoured despite not appearing in the license, which could be due to him being counted as a design based off of Godzilla. Like how Godzilla vs Kong and Godzilla 2014 featured other members of Godzilla species. Adding a little guy for Godzilla to care for would definitely make him more likeable, hopefully helping him have clearer motives. It would also be really cool to see 3 Godzillas in one film, just like the original movie Space Godzilla appeared in. But besides that, a parallel to the Egypt fight would be nice, with Godzilla having to go to Kong for help this time. That would give Godzilla some humility, and act as a way to get people still bitter about his mindless attacking in the last film on its side. Also, I would very much like to see the apes creating their new kingdom in the Hollow Earth, and Zuko growing older and maybe being trained by Kong. That is the only problem with Baby Godzilla, because that's usually been done with Kong in the previous movie. But if we just ignore that, this could also be a really good chance to finally give Kong the king part of his title, even if it can be a bit of a mouthful. Finally, Godzilla's design. I really want them to keep the evolved form. I'm rather fond of it, and it would help bridge the movies together. It'd be weird if he got rid of it only to get a new one, instead of it progressing further. The original plan for the next film involved Destroyer, who fought Godzilla in his burning form. After absorbing that much radiation in the last film, it would make sense to see that version return, especially due to him absorbing solar energy. So the supernova could be in reference to Godzilla going kablooey, and the rest of the title is also surrounded in flames. However, I really don't want them to use the burning form to get rid of the villain. It worked in King of the Monsters, but for a second time it would just be lazy. For the longest time I was on the fence with Burning Godzilla returning, as it's retreading old ground, but making it a consequence of the Barbie mode would be acceptable, in my entirely correct opinion. But anyways, that's it for this video. In case you're wondering why this video has so much more research put into it compared to my other ones, I floated the concept of this video past my mum, and she may or may not have a doctorate in psychology, so big thanks to her for that. My upload schedule might take a hit in February as I won't be able to edit for a couple days, so apologies in advance for that. Thank you all so much for watching this far through, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all later.